The champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers as I watched my sister Vivian clasp the Maharani's ruby around her throat, the same necklace that had gotten me killed in my previous life. "Oh, Elena, it's absolutely divine," she gushed, admiring herself in the gilt mirror of the Pemberton Museum's exclusive donor gala. "However did you manage to get your hands on such an exquisite piece? The museum curator was practically drooling over it during the authentication." I forced a smile, my heart hammering against my ribs. 24 hours ago, that necklace had been locked behind reinforced glass in the museum's most secure wing. Now it hung around my sister's neck like a beautiful noose, and she had no idea she was about to become the star of the most spectacular heist scandal in art history. "I have my ways," I murmured, watching as photographers captured her wearing what the world believed to be a priceless 18th century artifact worth $12 million. The irony was exquisite. In my first life, I had died trying to steal this very necklace to pay for our mother's cancer treatment. Treatment that Vivian had refused to help fund, despite her trust fund. I'd been caught, shot, and left to bleed out on the museum floor while she inherited everything and let our mother die alone. But death, as it turned out, was just the intermission before the real show began. 3 years ago, I'd woken up in my 16-year-old body with 25 years of memories intact and a burning desire for justice. This time, I knew exactly who my family really was beneath their perfect facades. This time, I had a plan. The real Maharani's ruby was safely locked in the museum's vault, exactly where it belonged. What Vivian wore was a perfect replica I'd commissioned, one that would fool experts for exactly long enough to destroy her life. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Package delivered, documentation uploaded, countdown begins now." I looked at my sister, radiant and oblivious, posing for society photographers while wearing stolen goods. In 12 hours, those photos would be evidence in an international art theft case. And this time, when the Blackwood family fell, I'd be the one left standing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, or rather, the ending that became my beginning. The first time I died, it was raining. I'd been crouched in the shadows of the Pemberton Museum's East Wing, my heart hammering as I worked the lockpicks my fence had taught me. The Maharani's ruby gleamed behind the glass case, mocking me with its impossible beauty. $12 million, enough to pay for Mom's experimental treatment in Switzerland. Enough to save her life. I'd begged Vivian for months. "Please, she's our mother. You have access to your trust fund now. Just this once, can't you help?" "Oh, Elena," she'd said, examining her manicured nails with studied indifference. "You know how irresponsible it would be to spend money on such a risky procedure. Mothers had a good life. Sometimes we have to accept when it's time to let go." Let go, as if our mother was an old dress Vivian had grown tired of. But Vivian had never been denied anything in her life. Born 2 years before me to father's first wife, the socialite beauty who died in a car accident when Vivian was 5, she'd been the golden child, the heir apparent, the one who could do no wrong. When father married my mother, a kind elementary school teacher, he'd made it clear that I was an afterthought, a consolation prize to keep his new wife happy. Vivian's trust fund matured at 21. Mine was contingent on marriage to a suitable man. Father's way of ensuring I'd never have true independence. At 23, Vivian was worth $15 million. At 21, I was worth whatever my potential husband decided I was. So when the doctor said the treatment could save Mom's life, I knew I had only one choice. The security system was supposedly state-of-the-art, but I'd spent 6 months studying the museum's operations, learning guard rotations, understanding the technology. I thought I'd planned for everything. I hadn't planned for Marcus Webb. The head of security materialized from the shadows like a nightmare, his gun already drawn. "Hands where I can see them, Miss Blackwood." My blood turned to ice. He knew my name. "That's right," he said, noting my expression. "You think you're the first little rich girl to try this? Your sister made it very clear what you might attempt. She's been feeding us information for weeks." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Vivian hadn't just refused to help. She'd actively sabotaged my desperate attempt to save our mother. She'd turned me in. "She said you'd become unstable over your mother's illness," Marcus continued. "Obsessed. She was worried you might do something desperate." "Worried?" I whispered. The word tasted like ashes. She'll be devastated, of course, but she'll recover. Rich girls always do. I saw my future flash before my eyes. Arrest, trial, prison. Mom dying alone while I rotted in a cell. Vivian inheriting everything, playing the tragic sister whose family was destroyed by mental illness and crime. That's when I made the stupidest decision of my life. I ran. The first shot shattered the display case. The second one shattered my spine. I died on the cold marble floor, surrounded by shards of glass and the sound of alarms, while the Maharani's ruby mocked me from its bed of broken crystal. My last thought was of my mother, alone in that hospital room, waiting for a daughter who would never come. Then I woke up in my childhood bedroom, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd pasted to the ceiling when I was 12. The date on my phone read September 15th, 2019. I was 16 again, with a decade of future knowledge and a rage that burned cold and bright as a winter star. This time, I knew exactly what my family was capable of. This time, I would be ready. Elena, darling, you're wool gathering again. Mother's voice drifted across the breakfast table, warm with affection. She looked so young, so healthy, so blissfully unaware that she had less than 5 years before cancer would begin eating her alive. I forced myself to focus on the present moment. Our sun-drenched kitchen, the smell of coffee and croissants, the normalcy that I now knew was an illusion. Just thinking about the college fair today, I lied smoothly. In my first life, I'd been excited about that fair, eager to explore my options. Now I knew that every choice I made would be subject to Father's approval and financial control. Well, make sure you consider practical programs, Father said without looking up from his financial reports. Art history and literature are lovely hobbies, but you'll need to think about marriage prospects. Of course, Daddy. I kept my voice light, but internally I was cataloging every dismissive word, every casual cruelty. I'd forgotten how early it had started, how seamlessly he'd trained me to accept my lesser status. Vivian glided into the kitchen like a swan, already perfectly made up despite the early hour. At 18, she was everything I wasn't. Tall, blonde, effortlessly elegant. In my first life, I'd worshipped her. Now I saw the calculation behind her every gesture. Good morning, family! She kissed Father's cheek and ruffled my hair with practiced sisterly affection. Elena, I love what you've done with your hair. So earnest. The backhanded compliment was delivered with a smile, the way Vivian always wielded her cruelty, wrapped in silk so the cuts went deeper. Thank you, I said, studying her face. Did she already know about Mother's future diagnosis? Had she planned even then to let her die? I'm meeting Trevor for lunch, Vivian announced, claiming her chair like a throne. Trevor Blackthorne, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, her latest conquest. In my first life, she'd eventually marry him for his connections and cheat on him for sport. His family's funding a new wing at the Children's Hospital. Such worthwhile philanthropy. How wonderful, Mother beamed. It's so important to give back. I nearly choked on my orange juice. Give back. Vivian had never given anything in her life that didn't come with strings attached or publicity value. After breakfast, I retreated to my room and opened my laptop. If I was going to take down my family, I needed to understand the battlefield better than I had the first time. The Blackwood family wealth came from 3 sources: Father's tech company, inherited from his father; Vivian's trust fund, inherited from her mother; and the real estate empire, built through generations of strategic marriages and calculated cruelty. We were old money with new money sensibilities, obsessed with status, power, and public perception. In my first life, I'd been naive enough to believe that family meant something, that love was automatic, that blood created unbreakable bonds. I'd learned too late that some families were more like parasites, feeding off each other until only the strongest survived. This time, I wouldn't be the host. I spent the afternoon researching the Pemberton Museum, studying its security systems, learning about its most prized acquisitions. The Maharani's ruby was already there, having been acquired the previous year from a private collector. In my first life, I'd learned about it accidentally, overhearing Father mention its value at a dinner party. But this time, I had an advantage. I knew exactly how sophisticated the museum's security really was, because I'd spent months studying it before my failed heist. More importantly, I knew about Marcus Webb's corruption, how he supplemented his income by providing wealthy families with security consultations and the occasional favor. The plan began to form, beautiful and terrible as justice itself. I would give Vivian exactly what she'd always craved: the spotlight, the admiration, the chance to be the center of attention. And then I would watch as that spotlight burned her to ashes. But first, I needed to establish my new identity: the sister who was helpful, supportive, and completely harmless. You want to transfer to Whitmore Academy? Father's eyebrows rose to his hairline. We were in his study, surrounded by the leather-bound books he'd never read and the awards he'd never earned. Elena, that's a very expensive school. I know, Daddy, but they have the best art authentication program in the country. I've been reading about art forgery and provenance verification. It's fascinating. I kept my voice bright and enthusiastic, the perfect eager daughter. Think about how useful those skills could be for insurance purposes, or for authenticating pieces for charity auctions. In my first life, I'd studied literature and philosophy, useless degrees that had left me completely dependent on my family's financial support. This time, I was going to learn skills that would serve my purposes. Art authentication, Father mused. That does sound practical. And Vivian went to Whitmore, I added, playing my trump card. I'd love to follow in her footsteps. Well, he smiled, the first genuine expression of approval I'd seen from him in weeks. I suppose we could make arrangements. Whitmore Academy was where the children of the cultural elite learned to become the next generation of museum directors, gallery owners, and art dealers. It was also where I would learn to distinguish authentic pieces from reproductions with scientific precision. More importantly, it was where I would meet Dr. Sarah Chen, the professor who would unknowingly provide me with the skills to pull off the perfect crime. The next few months passed in a blur of careful positioning. I threw myself into my studies with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, including myself. Art history, material science, conservation techniques, I absorbed everything like a sponge. At home, I played the role of the supportive younger sister perfectly. I praised Vivian's outfits, asked her advice about boys, and never once challenged her authority. She began to relax around me, treating me with the fond condescension she might show a particularly clever pet. You're becoming quite the little expert, she said one evening, finding me surrounded by art books in the library. All this studying is very impressive, Elena. Thank you, I beamed at her. I just find it so fascinating. Did you know that some of the most expensive pieces in major museums are actually very good forgeries? The real ones were stolen or destroyed decades ago, but the institutions can't admit it without losing credibility. How interesting, Vivian said, though her attention had already wandered to her phone. If she'd been paying attention, she might have wondered why I was so interested in the intersection of forgery, theft, and institutional reputation. But Vivian had never paid attention to anything that didn't directly benefit her. That was going to be her downfall. And by Christmas, my grades were stellar, and my reputation at school was solid. I'd made friends with the right people, impressed the right professors, and established myself as someone with genuine expertise in art authentication. I'd also begun the delicate process of building my network. Professor Chen, I said after class one day, could I ask you about a hypothetical scenario? Dr. Chen looked up from her papers, her expression curious. She was a small woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. Of course, Elena, what's your question? If someone wanted to create a perfect replica of a famous piece, not for forgery but for insurance purposes or museum exhibition while the original was being restored, how would they go about it? Ah, she smiled. You're thinking about conservation and display strategies. Very forward-thinking. She spent the next hour explaining the process: high-resolution scanning, materials analysis, specialized craftsmanship. It was a legitimate practice in the museum world used to protect valuable pieces while still allowing public access. The key, she explained, is transparency. Legitimate replicas are always clearly labeled and documented. It's only when that transparency is compromised that ethical problems arise. I nodded seriously, filing away every detail. And if someone wanted to have a replica made privately? Well, there are several excellent craftsmen who specialize in that work. Very expensive, of course, but some collectors like to have copies made for insurance purposes. Display the replica, store the original safely. She paused. Though, of course, one would need access to the original for detailed analysis. Of course, I agreed, my mind already racing ahead to the next phase of my plan. That night, I called Marcus Webb. Miss Blackwood? He sounded surprised to hear from me. Is everything all right? Oh, yes, everything's fine. I'm actually calling about a business proposition. I let a note of nervous excitement creep into my voice. I know this might sound strange, but I'm studying art authentication at Whitmore, and I have a rather unusual request. I'm listening. My family has some valuable pieces, and I've become concerned about security after learning so much about art theft in my classes. I was wondering if you might be available for a private consultation. I'd pay your usual rate, of course. There was a pause. Marcus Webb was exactly the kind of man who enjoyed being flattered by wealthy young women, especially when they came with checkbooks. I think I could arrange something, he said finally. What specific concerns did you have? Well, I said, letting my voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. I've been reading about a technique where thieves create perfect replicas and swap them for originals. The theft isn't discovered for months, sometimes years. I'd love to understand how institutions protect against that. Ah, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Very sophisticated thinking. Yes, I think we should definitely talk. We arranged to meet the following week. By the time I hung up, I was grinning. Marcus Webb thought he was about to gain a new client. What he was actually going to become was an unwitting accomplice in his own professional destruction. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed to be patient. Vivian's downfall required careful orchestration, and I only had one chance to get it right. In my first life, I'd rushed into desperation and gotten myself killed. This time, I was going to take my time and savor every moment of her destruction. The spring of my junior year brought unexpected complications in the form of my mother's health screening. Just routine blood work, she assured me, but I knew better. In my first life, the cancer had been caught late because she'd ignored early symptoms. This time, I was watching for signs. Mom, I said carefully, I've been reading about preventive health measures in my biology class. Did you know that women with certain genetic markers should have more frequent screenings? Oh, sweetheart, I'm sure I'm fine. The doctor would tell me if there was anything to worry about. But I'd learned not to trust doctors' definitions of routine when it came to my family. The Blackwood name commanded respect, but it also meant that uncomfortable truths were often softened or delayed. I couldn't save her from getting sick. The cancer was already growing, invisible and inevitable. But I could ensure that this time, she wouldn't face it alone and abandoned. That meant accelerating my timeline. My meeting with Marcus Webb had gone better than expected. He'd been thoroughly charmed by my combination of naive enthusiasm and obvious wealth, and he'd shared far more information than he should have about museum security protocols. The key thing to understand, he'd explained over coffee, is that security is often about perception as much as reality. If someone looks like they belong somewhere, most people won't question their presence. That's fascinating, I'd said, wide-eyed. So someone could potentially walk into a museum and just take something. Not quite that simple, he'd laughed. But you'd be surprised how many thefts succeed because the perpetrator had legitimate access to begin with. Inside jobs, you know. That's why trust is so important in this business. Trust. The word had sat bitter on my tongue, but I'd smiled and nodded and played the impressed student. Now, 6 months later, I was ready to put that trust to the test. Marcus, I said when I called him, I have an unusual favor to ask. My sister is getting married next year, and I wanted to surprise her with something special for the engagement party. This was a lie. Vivian wasn't engaged yet, though she was certainly angling for Trevor to propose. But Marcus didn't know that. Well, she's always been fascinated by historical jewelry, particularly Indian pieces. I was wondering if there might be a way for her to borrow something beautiful for the party? From a private collection, perhaps? I'd pay any insurance or security costs, of course. There was a long pause. I held my breath, waiting to see if my months of careful relationship building had been enough. That's an interesting request, Marcus said finally. I might know someone who collects pieces like that. Someone who might be willing to arrange a private viewing, perhaps even a short-term loan for a special occasion. Really? I let excitement bubble into my voice. That would be incredible. She would be over the moon. Let me make some calls, he said. I'll get back to you. I hung up and smiled. Marcus Webb thought he was arranging a favor for a wealthy client. What he was actually doing was setting up the chain of evidence that would destroy both him and my sister. The next phase required a trip to New York. A weekend in the city sounds wonderful, Mother said when I proposed the idea. But why don't you invite Vivian? You two could have some sister time. Actually, I said, I was hoping to surprise her with something. You know how she loves vintage jewelry? I thought I might find something special for her birthday. How thoughtful. Yes, go ahead. Your father can arrange for you to stay at the apartment. The Blackwood family maintained a penthouse on the Upper East Side, a tax write-off disguised as a convenience. It would be the perfect base of operations for what I needed to do. I spent 3 days in New York, ostensibly shopping, but actually meeting with the craftsman Dr. Chen had recommended. Liu Wei specialized in historical reproductions for museums and private collectors, and his work was flawless. The piece you're describing is quite complex, he said, studying the photographs I'd brought. Rubies of that size and quality are very rare. The goldwork alone would take weeks to replicate properly. Money is no object, I assured him, and I have detailed specifications. I handed him a folder containing everything I'd been able to gather about the Maharani's ruby. Dimensions, materials analysis, historical provenance documentation. Where did you obtain such detailed information? Liu asked, his expression curious. Family connections, I said vaguely. We have a relationship with several museums. This is for insurance purposes. It wasn't entirely a lie. This was definitely about insurance, specifically about ensuring that justice was finally served. The timeline is aggressive, Liu warned. For work of this quality, I typically require 6 months minimum. I can pay double your usual rate for expedited service, I said, and I need a guarantee that this will be indistinguishable from the original under normal viewing conditions. Liu's eyes gleamed with the combination of professional pride and financial incentive. 3 months, he said finally, and it will be perfect. I shook his hand, knowing I'd just set the final piece of the trap. The real Maharani's ruby would remain safely in its case at the Pemberton Museum. But when Vivian wore Liu's perfect replica to what she thought was a private party, she'd actually be providing the evidence for her own arrest. All I had to do now was wait and make sure I was nowhere near the blast radius when everything exploded. Elena, you've been different lately, Vivian said one evening in late spring. We were in her room, supposedly helping her choose outfits for her upcoming trip to the Hamptons. More focused. It's like you found your purpose or something. I looked up from the jewelry box I'd been organizing, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Maybe I have. You've always been so confident, so sure of yourself. I guess I'm finally figuring out who I want to be. And who's that? She turned to face me, her expression genuinely curious for perhaps the first time in years. Someone who gets what she wants, I said simply. Vivian smiled, apparently taking this as a compliment to her influence. Good for you. You've spent too long being the sweet, accommodating little sister. It's time you learn to fight for yourself. If only she knew. That night, I received a call from Liu Wei. Miss Blackwood, the piece is ready for your inspection. My heart leaped. 3 months of planning, 3 months of careful positioning, and the centerpiece of my revenge was finally complete. I'll be there tomorrow, I said. The replica was breathtaking. Liu had outdone himself, creating something that would fool even expert authentication under casual inspection. The rubies caught the light with the same inner fire as the original. The goldwork was identical down to the microscopic level, and the weight distribution was perfect. You've exceeded my expectations, I told him honestly, and this is extraordinary work. Thank you. I assume you'll be handling the insurance documentation yourself? Of course. I carefully packed the necklace in its custom case. The paperwork is already in progress. Another lie, the only paperwork involved would be police reports and arrest warrants. I returned to Connecticut with my beautiful weapon and began the final phase of the operation. The first step was establishing the necklace's false provenance. This required another call to Marcus Webb. Marcus, I have wonderful news. That collector you mentioned has agreed to loan my sister a piece for her engagement party. A ruby necklace from the 18th century? Absolutely stunning. That's excellent, Marcus said. I'm sure she'll be thrilled. The only thing is, the insurance requires professional authentication before the loan can be finalized. Could you recommend someone? Of course, I know several qualified appraisers. When is the event? Next month. The collector is being very generous with the timeline. Marcus arranged for Dr. Richard Stern, a respected gemologist, to authenticate the piece. I delivered the replica to his office with a folder of carefully prepared documentation, all of it technically accurate, all of it designed to support the narrative I was building. Dr. Stern's report was exactly what I'd hoped for. The necklace was confirmed as an authentic 18th century piece, consistent with historical records of the Maharani's ruby collection, worth approximately $12 million. The irony was exquisite. The report was completely accurate. Lou had created a perfect replica of a genuine historical artifact. The only lie was the implication that this particular replica was the original. With the authentication complete, I now had official documentation supporting the necklace's value and legitimacy. More importantly, I had created a paper trail that would lead investigators directly to my sister. The final step was the simplest, giving Vivian exactly what she'd always wanted. Vivian, I said, finding her in the garden one afternoon, I have something for you. She looked up from her magazine, eyebrows raised. Oh? I presented the jewelry case with the appropriate ceremony. An early birthday present. Something special I've been arranging. Her eyes widened when she opened the case. Elena, this is incredible. How did you? I have my ways, I said, echoing her own words from the museum gala that would destroy her life. I thought you might like to wear it to the Pemberton fundraiser next week. The museum gala? Vivian's eyes lit up with avarice and ambition. Elena, this is museum quality. People will be talking about this for months. I certainly hope so, I said sincerely. She lifted the necklace from its case with reverent hands. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, but are you sure? This must have cost... It's yours, I said firmly. You've always said I needed to learn to be more generous. Consider this my first lesson. Vivian threw her arms around me, and for a moment I remembered why I'd loved her once. Then I thought of our mother, dying alone, while Vivian spent her inheritance on shoes. And the moment passed. You're the best sister anyone could ask for, Vivian said, and I almost laughed at the irony. Just promise me you'll wear it to the gala, I said. I want everyone to see how beautiful you look. Of course. Oh, Elena, this is perfect. Trevor will be so impressed. Everyone will be so jealous. She had no idea how right she was. The night of the Pemberton Museum Gala, I dressed carefully in a simple black dress, elegant enough for the occasion, forgettable enough to avoid drawing attention. Tonight was Vivian's night to shine, and I intended to make sure everyone remembered exactly how radiant she looked. I arrived at the museum early, ostensibly to help with the setup as a volunteer coordinator. In reality, I needed to make sure everything was perfectly positioned for the evening's grand finale. The first step was confirming that Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the museum's director, would be in attendance. Dr. Hartwell was known for her encyclopedic knowledge of the museum's collection and her particular expertise in Indian jewelry. Dr. Hartwell? I approached her during the cocktail hour. I'm Elena Blackwood. I'm studying art authentication at Whitmore. Ah, yes, Sarah Chen mentioned you. She says you're one of her most promising students. Thank you. I was wondering if you might have a moment later this evening. My sister is wearing a rather remarkable piece of jewelry tonight, and I'd love to get your professional opinion on it. Of course, dear. I'm always happy to discuss historical pieces with enthusiastic students. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Vivian to walk into it. She arrived fashionably late, naturally, making an entrance that would have done justice to a Hollywood premiere. The Maharani's ruby blazed at her throat, catching every light in the room and drawing gasps of admiration from everyone who saw it. Vivian Blackwood is wearing the most extraordinary necklace, I heard someone whisper. Where do you suppose she got it? Family heirloom, probably. The Blackwoods have been collecting for generations. Perfect. Let them spread the story. The more people who noticed the necklace, the more witnesses there would be to her crime. I spent the evening playing my role perfectly, the proud little sister beaming with happiness at Vivian's success. I made sure to point out the necklace to several museum board members, art dealers, and society photographers. "Isn't it magnificent?" I gushed to Mrs. Pemberton herself. "Vivian has such exquisite taste." "Indeed," Mrs. Pemberton agreed, studying the necklace with the practiced eye of a serious collector. "That's quite a remarkable piece. 18th century, I'd say. Indian court jewelry, worth a fortune." "She's always had an eye for quality," I said modestly. By 10 o'clock, half the room was talking about Vivian's stunning necklace. The photographers had captured her from every angle. The society bloggers were already posting photos online with captions like, "Mystery heiress stuns and museum-quality rubies." It was time for the final act. "Dr. Hartwell," I said, approaching her near the end of the evening, "would now be a good time for you to take a look at my sister's necklace? She'd be thrilled to hear your thoughts." "Absolutely, let's go find her." We located Vivian holding court near the museum's Indian art wing, surrounded by admirers and still glowing with triumph. "Vivian," I called out, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Hartwell, the museum director. She's interested in hearing about your necklace." Vivian turned with her most dazzling smile. "Dr. Hartwell, what an honor. Elena told me you might take a look at this piece. It's been in our family for generations." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that I almost believed it myself. Almost. Dr. Hartwell moved closer, her expression shifting from polite interest to sharp focus as she examined the necklace. I watched her face carefully, timing my next move to perfection. "Fascinating," Dr. Hartwell murmured. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The rubies are particularly fine specimens." She paused, her brow furrowing slightly. "May I ask, do you have provenance documentation for this piece?" "Family records," Vivian said confidently. "My father handles all of that tedious paperwork." Dr. Hartwell's expression grew more troubled. "Miss Blackwood, I'm afraid I must ask you a rather direct question. Are you familiar with the Maharani's ruby collection?" "I'm sorry." Vivian's smile faltered slightly. "This necklace," Dr. Hartwell said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet group, "appears to be identical to a piece in our permanent collection. In fact, it appears to be the Maharani's ruby itself." The silence stretched like a held breath. I could see the moment when Vivian realized she was trapped, when the confident facade cracked and revealed the panic underneath. That's impossible," she stammered. "This is a family heirloom. It's been authenticated." "By whom?" Dr. Hartwell's voice was sharp now, professional curiosity replaced by serious concern. Before Vivian could answer, security appeared as if summoned by magic. Marcus Webb stepped forward, his expression grim. "Dr. Hartwell," he said formally, "we've just completed our evening inventory. The Maharani's ruby is missing from its case." The gasps from the crowd were audible now. Camera phones appeared, capturing every moment of Vivian's humiliation. I stepped back into the shadows, watching my sister's world collapse in real time. "This is insane," Vivian said, her voice rising. "There's been some mistake. Elena, tell them about the authentication, about the collector." But I was already moving, slipping away from the crowd as security closed in. I had exactly 15 minutes before they realized I was gone, and I needed to be far away when they discovered the truth. Because the truth was beautifully, perfectly designed to destroy my sister without touching me. The real Maharani's ruby was indeed missing from its case, because I'd arranged for it to be borrowed earlier that evening, using credentials Marcus Webb had provided during our months of consultations. The same Marcus Webb who was now discovering the theft. In his office safe, investigators would find detailed communications about the loan, payment records, and insurance documentation, all pointing to a sophisticated inside job orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of the museum's operations. Someone like Vivian Blackwood, who had been photographed wearing what appeared to be the stolen piece in front of hundreds of witnesses. The beautiful irony was that Vivian was wearing a perfect replica of the stolen original, but she didn't know that. As far as she knew, she was wearing genuine stolen goods, which made her panic authentic and her guilt apparent to everyone watching. Meanwhile, the real Maharani's ruby would be discovered in a safety deposit box registered under Vivian's name. A safety deposit box I'd opened using the identity documents I'd carefully stolen from her room months earlier. By the time investigators unraveled the full scope of the crime, they'd find a trail of evidence pointing to an elaborate theft ring involving Vivian, Marcus Webb, and several fictitious accomplices. The authentication documents would lead them to Dr. Stern, who would confirm that he'd examined the piece for Vivian Blackwood. Marcus Webb's financial records would show payments from the Blackwood family account. Every piece of evidence was real. Every document was authentic. Every witness statement would be truthful. The only lie was the one that mattered most, that Vivian had knowingly participated in the theft. She hadn't. She was guilty of greed, vanity, and cruelty, but not of art theft. That crime belonged to me alone. But justice, I'd learned, was rarely about legal guilt or innocence. It was about consequences finally catching up with people who thought they were untouchable. I drove through the night, taking back roads toward the family cabin in Vermont. By the time the sun rose, my phone was buzzing with missed calls and frantic text messages. "Elena, where are you? Something terrible has happened to Vivian. Call me immediately. Your sister has been arrested. This is insane. The police think Vivian stole some necklace from the museum. We need you home now." I waited until I was safely ensconced in the cabin before calling Father back. "Elena!" His voice was sharp with panic. "Where the hell are you?" "I'm at the cabin. I needed to get away for the weekend. All that studying was making me anxious." "What's wrong? You sound upset." "Your sister has been arrested for art theft, grand larceny. The FBI is involved, Elena. The FBI..." I let shock and disbelief color my voice. "That's impossible. Vivian wouldn't steal anything. There must be some mistake." "That's what I thought. But the evidence..." Father's voice cracked. "They have photographs of her wearing the stolen piece at the museum gala. Security footage of someone matching her description near the case earlier that evening. Financial records showing payments to the security chief." "I don't understand. What necklace? What payments?" "That ruby necklace she was wearing last night. Apparently, it's worth $12 million and belongs to the museum. And there are bank records showing transfers from our family account to Marcus Webb, the head of security." My blood ran cold, not from fear, but from the pure satisfaction of watching every domino fall exactly as planned. "But Daddy, that's the necklace I gave her, the birthday present. I had it authenticated and everything." The silence on the other end stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. "Elena," Father said finally, his voice deadly quiet, "where exactly did you get that necklace?" "From a private collector, just like I told Vivian. I worked with Marcus Webb to arrange the authentication and insurance. I have all the paperwork." Which was true. I did have paperwork. Carefully crafted documents that would support the narrative of Vivian's guilt while making me appear as an innocent victim of her manipulation. "You worked with Marcus Webb?" Father's voice rose. "Elena, Marcus Webb has been arrested as Vivian's accomplice. He's claiming that Vivian approached him months ago about stealing museum pieces." "That can't be right," I said, injecting just the right note of confused betrayal into my voice. "He told me he was helping me surprise Vivian. He said the collector was a friend of his, someone who specialized in Indian jewelry." Another silence. I could practically hear the pieces clicking together in Father's mind, but clicking together in exactly the wrong pattern. "Elena," he said slowly, "I think you may have been used. Vivian and Webb may have manipulated you into participating without realizing what you were doing." Perfect. Father was doing exactly what I'd hoped, constructing a narrative that made me an innocent pawn rather than the architect of the entire scheme. "You think Vivian knew?" I whispered. "You think she used me?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Father's voice was heavy with exhaustion. "Just come home. We need to figure this out together." I hung up and allowed myself a moment of pure triumph. In one night, I'd destroyed both Vivian and Marcus Webb while positioning myself as their victim. The FBI would find evidence of a sophisticated theft ring with tentacles reaching into the highest levels of museum security and high society. They'd find financial records, authentication documents, and communication trails that painted a picture of elaborate criminal conspiracy. I was untouchable. The drive back to Connecticut took 3 hours, giving me time to prepare for the performance of my life. I needed to be shocked, hurt, confused, and ultimately devastated by my sister's betrayal. I arrived home to find FBI agents in our driveway and reporters camped outside our gates. The Blackwood family scandal was already making national news. "Elena!" Mother rushed to embrace me the moment I walked through the door. Her face was ravaged with grief and confusion. "Oh, sweetheart, this is all so horrible. I can't believe Vivian would do something like this." "Where is she?" I asked. "Federal detention," Father said grimly. "No bail. They consider her a flight risk." Agent Sarah Rodriguez, the FBI investigator in charge of the case, wanted to interview me immediately. We sat in Father's study while Mother hovered anxiously and our family lawyer took notes. "Miss Blackwood," Agent Rodriguez began, "we understand that you gave your sister the necklace she was wearing last night. Can you tell us about that?" I took a shaky breath, playing the role of the confused victim perfectly. "I thought I was giving her a birthday present. I'd been saving money from my job at the gallery and I wanted to get her something special." "Where did you purchase the necklace?" "I didn't purchase it exactly. Marcus Webb, he's the security chief at the museum. He helped me arrange to borrow it from a private collector. He said the collector was a friend of his who sometimes loaned pieces for special occasions." Agent Rodriguez exchanged glances with her partner. "Did Mr. Webb ask for payment for this service?" "Yes, but he said it was just to cover insurance and handling fees. Nothing major, a few $1,000s. I paused, letting confusion creep into my voice. "That's normal, isn't it? For borrowing valuable jewelry?" "Miss Blackwood, what we're finding in our investigation suggests that this wasn't a legitimate loan arrangement. The payments you made to Mr. Webb appear to have been part of a larger conspiracy to steal museum artifacts." I stared at her in apparent shock. "Steal? But Vivian said she loved historical jewelry. She's always talking about pieces she sees in museums. I thought I was doing something nice for her." "We believe your sister may have manipulated you into facilitating this theft without your knowledge," Agent Rodriguez said gently. "Mr. Webb has indicated that Miss Vivian Blackwood approached him several months ago about acquiring certain pieces from the museum's collection." "She approached him?" I whispered. But I was the one who contacted him first, wasn't I?" The confusion in my voice was perfect, the sound of someone realizing they'd been used by people they trusted. "According to Mr. Webb's statement, your sister had already discussed the possibility of theft when you made contact. He claims she instructed him to present the scheme to you as a legitimate loan arrangement." I buried my face in my hands, my shoulders shaking with what appeared to be devastation. "She used me. She knew I wanted to do something special for her, and she used that to make me part of her crime." Mother made a soft sound of distress. Father's hand clenched into a fist. "We don't believe you had any knowledge of the criminal nature of the transaction," Agent Rodriguez assured me. "You appear to be as much a victim here as the museum." The interview continued for another hour, with me providing helpful details about my interactions with Marcus Webb, my authentication of the necklace, and my complete ignorance of any criminal intent. Every answer I gave supported the narrative that Vivian had orchestrated the theft and manipulated me into unknowing participation. By the time the agents left, I'd been officially classified as a cooperating witness rather than a suspect. "Elena," Father said once we were alone, "I owe you an apology. When this first happened, I wondered. But I should have known you would never be involved in something like this knowingly." "I trusted her," I said quietly. "I thought I was being a good sister." "You were," Mother said firmly. "This isn't your fault, sweetheart. Vivian has made her own choices. If only she knew how right she was." The trial began 6 months later, and it was everything I'd hoped for. The prosecution's case was airtight. They had security footage of someone matching Vivian's description near the Maharani's ruby case on the night of the theft. They had financial records showing payments from the Blackwood family account to Marcus Webb. They had authentication documents bearing Vivian's signature. They had photographs of her wearing the stolen piece in front of hundreds of witnesses. Most damaging of all, they had Marcus Webb's testimony. Faced with overwhelming evidence of his own guilt, Webb had quickly agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. His story painted Vivian as the mastermind of the operation, a wealthy socialite who'd become obsessed with owning pieces from the museum's collection and had recruited him to help her steal them. She approached me about 6 months before the theft, Webb testified, looking directly at Vivian across the courtroom. She said she wanted to acquire certain pieces for her private collection and was willing to pay handsomely for my assistance. Vivian's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the authentication documents, the security footage, everything supported Webb's version of events. She was very clever about it, Webb continued. She used her younger sister as an unwitting accomplice, making it appear that the girl was arranging a legitimate loan when in fact we were planning to steal the piece. I sat in the gallery watching my sister's face crumble as witness after witness testified to her guilt. She kept looking back at me, her eyes pleading for understanding, for support, for some sign that I believed in her innocence. I gave her nothing but the blank stare of a victim who'd finally seen her abuser's true nature. The defense's case was weak. Vivian's lawyer argued that she'd been framed, that the evidence had been fabricated, that someone else had orchestrated the theft and made her the scapegoat. But they had no alternate suspect, no evidence of manipulation, no credible explanation for how Vivian had come to be wearing the stolen necklace. When Vivian took the stand in her own defense, her testimony was desperate and unconvincing. "I never spoke to Marcus Webb before that night," she insisted. "I didn't know anything about any theft. My sister gave me the necklace as a gift. She said it was from a private collector." "And you didn't think to question how your college-age sister could afford a $12 million necklace?" the prosecutor asked. I thought maybe it was a family piece. Elena has always been interested in art and jewelry. I trusted her." "So you're claiming that your sister, who you describe as naive and trusting, somehow orchestrated this elaborate theft without your knowledge?" "No. I'm saying I don't know how any of this happened. Someone is setting me up." "Who would want to frame you, Miss Blackwood?" Vivian's eyes found mine across the courtroom. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her expression. Not quite understanding, but the beginning of suspicion. "I don't know," she whispered, but I could see that she was starting to wonder. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Vivian Blackwood was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for grand larceny, conspiracy, and art theft. Marcus Webb received 10 years for his cooperation. I sat in the front row as the sentence was read, tears streaming down my face. Tears of grief for the sister I'd lost, tears of relief that justice had finally been served. At least that's what everyone thought they were seeing. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Within weeks of the trial's conclusion, the Blackwood family's social standing collapsed entirely. Father's tech company lost major contracts as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. Mother retreated into herself, devastated by the revelation of Vivian's true nature and the realization that she'd been blind to her daughter's criminal tendencies. The family fortune, while not destroyed, was severely damaged by legal fees, restitution payments, and the social exile that followed our disgrace. It was everything I'd wanted, and more. But the most satisfying part came 3 months after Vivian's sentencing, when I received a letter from her in prison. "Elena, but I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I keep coming back to the same questions. How did you afford to commission such a perfect replica? How did you know exactly which piece to target? How did you manage to coordinate everything so perfectly?" The Elena I knew was sweet and naive, and completely incapable of this kind of sophisticated planning. But maybe I never really knew you at all. I still don't understand how you did it, but I'm starting to understand why. I know I wasn't always the sister I should have been. I know I was selfish and cruel and took advantage of your love. But this was beyond anything I deserved. You didn't just destroy me, Elena. You destroyed our entire family. Mother is sick with grief. Father's business is failing. Was your revenge really worth all of that? I may never get out of here, but you have to live with what you've done for the rest of your life. I hope it was worth it. Vivian. I read the letter twice, then burned it in the fireplace. She was right about one thing. I would have to live with what I'd done for the rest of my life. But she was wrong about whether it was worth it. Every morning when I woke up, I remembered the feeling of dying alone on that museum floor while she inherited everything. I remembered our mother's face when the doctor said the treatment was too expensive. I remembered years of casual cruelty disguised as sisterly love. Yes, it was worth it. The only regret I had was that Vivian would never know the full truth. She'd go to her grave wondering how I'd pulled it off, never knowing about the rebirth that had given me the knowledge and motivation to destroy her so completely. But perhaps that was its own form of justice. She'd spent her life underestimating me, dismissing me, treating me as irrelevant. Now she could spend her remaining years knowing that the sister she'd considered harmless had been capable of orchestrating her complete downfall. The cancer had come just as I'd known it would, but this time I'd been ready. This time, I'd had the resources to fight it. The Blackwood family fortune might have been diminished by scandal, but my share was more than enough to pay for the best treatment money could buy. The Swiss clinic, the experimental therapies, the round-the-clock care, everything Vivian had refused to provide in my first life. Mother stirred in her sleep and I moved to adjust her blankets. "Elena," she whispered, "is that you, sweetheart?" "I'm here, Mom. How are you feeling?" "Better," she said with a weak smile. "The doctors say the new treatment is working. The tumors are shrinking." "That's wonderful news." I kissed her forehead gently. "Get some rest. I'll be right here." As she drifted back to sleep, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. In my first life, I'd died trying to save her and failed. In this life, I'd succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about ensuring that the right people survived. My phone buzzed with a text from my literary agent. My debut novel, a thriller about art theft and family betrayal, had just sold to a major publisher for a 7-figure advance. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was profiting from a fictionalized version of my own crimes, but art, like justice, had always been about perspective. The book would be published under a pseudonym, of course. Elena Blackwood needed to remain the innocent victim, the naive sister who'd been manipulated by criminals. But my author identity would be free to explore darker themes of revenge, betrayal, and the price of justice. I was finally living the life I'd always wanted, independent, successful, and completely in control of my own destiny. Mother would survive her cancer and live to see me graduate from Whitmore, perhaps even walk me down the aisle someday if I chose to marry. Father had learned to respect me, to value my opinions, and acknowledge my intelligence. The family business was slowly recovering, helped by my strategic insights and careful networking. And Vivian? Well, Vivian was exactly where she belonged. I'd given her everything she'd ever wanted. The spotlight, the attention, the chance to be the center of everyone's conversation. She'd finally achieved the fame she'd always craved. She just hadn't expected it to come with a prison sentence. But that was the thing about revenge. It was all about giving people exactly what they deserved, even if they didn't realize they deserved it. I closed my mother's hospital room door quietly and walked toward the elevator, already planning my next chapter. There were other stories to tell, other injustices to address, other people who thought they were untouchable. After all, I'd learned that dying was just the beginning. Sometimes the best revenge was living well, and living long enough to see all your enemies fall. The elevator doors closed, and I smiled at my reflection in the polished steel. Elena Blackwood, victim of her sister's crimes, devoted daughter, successful writer, and secret architect of perfect justice. It was exactly the life I'd died for, and this time, I intended to keep it.